Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webcast on creating a data-driven organization. So, my name is Amanda Teska. I'm a business intelligence and analytics consultant with Thorogood. I've been working with Thorogood for a number of years now on enterprise business intelligence implementations. I've been working to help customers really move towards a more data-driven culture. I'm joining today's webcast from our Philadelphia office. So for those of you who don't know Thorogood, I'll just give you kind of a quick rundown. We are an independent global professional services firm specializing in business intelligence and analytics, strategies, solutions, and services. As you can see, we've been around for 30 years. I actually just celebrated our kind of 30-year anniversary. And we have a keen focus on our customers. We are a global company, so in the U.S. we have offices in New York and Philadelphia, which is where I'm at today, but we also have offices in London, in Bangalore in India, and also in Singapore. And we do work across a number of different industries, including insurance, banking, consumer goods, pharma, and health services sectors. And in terms of the services we provide, we work with our customers on a full range of BI and analytics services, including things like strategy and roadmaps, requirements, design, implementation, training, and support. We do work with a number of blue-chip customers from the sectors that I just mentioned. I thought I would just share this slide to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the types of customer experiences that I'll be drawing on today as we talk a little bit about creating a data-driven organization. And Thorogood is an independent consultancy, which means that we don't work with any one specific technology. We do, however, partner with a wide array of technology firms in the business intelligence market, including different back-end, front-end, and analytics-driven technologies. And we really do specialize in kind of integrating those technologies in enterprise customer landscapes. Now, today's webcast isn't about any one particular technology, but I will draw on a couple of these as I talk through some of the different aspects that you'll be considering. So in terms of this session today, what can you expect? What we're really looking to do here is to introduce a little bit of the value of data-driven decision-making and share some key considerations for moving your organization up that capability curve. We'll look at a couple key factors, and that'll be the people, data, tools, and processes that really allow organizations to better empower their users so that they can make more data-driven decisions. So with that, we'll get started. We'll start out today by talking a little bit about why companies have really decided to make the move towards being more data-driven. It's really been in the last decade or so that we've seen a number of studies kind of coming through from different academic organizations that really assess the impact of using data to improve decision-making. This one you're seeing on the screen is from 2011. This was a collaboration between MIT and Wharton schools, and this really gotten the attention of a number of our customers. What the study had showed was that there was a relationship between data-driven decision-making and a number of different kind of key factors within organizations, so things like increased productivity, return on assets, et cetera. And the thing about the study was that they suggested that it was a causal relationship, so that the data-driven decision-making was kind of what was leading to those improved factors. And this is just another example of some more research, so again from 2011, something that really kind of corroborated the findings of the Wharton-MIT collaboration. And I would say for many, really, the recognition that data-driven decision-making can improve outcomes has started to be, I would say, somewhat kind of generally accepted across most of our customers and many large organizations. And it's been very easy to point to some high-value business decisions that would result in tangible business benefit if only they could kind of improve the amount of analysis or the types of information that was kind of being done on those areas. And so really, I think the decision to move towards being more data-driven is one that's been quite easy for customers, but creating a culture where this flourishes and where it works kind of well has been, I think, a bit daunting for some organizations. And so today what we'll be looking at is how organizations really kind of go about creating this sort of culture and the pillars that are really needed to make that a success. One more slide I'll show on kind of the value of moving towards more data-driven. back in 2013, Gartner had put forward this image, which many of you may have seen. It was circulated really through many kind of BI and analytics forums. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Gartner, Gartner is an American research and advisory firm that provides information technology kind of related insight. And this image really conveyed kind of the concept of descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive analytics, and really started to kind of indicate the increased value to our organization from moving up the analytic curve. To be honest, back in 2013 when this was first circulated, we saw it have a pretty profound impact on a number of our customers. I think many organizations kind of saw this and thought, you know, I really need to be in that top right corner, but felt some anxiety that many of them were still working quite a bit with descriptive and diagnostic. And so as a result of that, we started to see a number of kind of initiatives trying to move the needle on predictive and prescriptive coming out really without kind of full consideration for the spectrum of different reporting types and needs here. And so something that I thought was always a bit ambiguous about this chart is that, you know, is it really possible to quantify the value of these things, to say that, you know, one is more important than the other? So can you really have, you know, predictive or prescriptive without being descriptive and diagnostic as well? Do they build on each other, or is it kind of an ever-increasing value chain? And I think more importantly for me was, you know, are these discrete entities? So is it easy to say where descriptive stops and predictive begins, or sorry, where diagnostic stops and predictive begins? And could you really be good at prescriptive and just mediocre at descriptive? So for me, it started to introduce a number of different questions. And it really kind of got us thinking much less about those entities being discrete items and much more about them being kind of a continuum. So if you think about the same kind of aspects, so your descriptive reporting, which may be your more kind of productionized, robust business intelligence that you might be familiar with, things that are, you know, maybe more structured or operational. Your diagnostic reporting, so maybe things that are more ad hoc, browsing, drag and dropping, knowing that you're looking for an answer but not necessarily being able to know kind of in advance what it is. And then putting those predictive and prescriptive aspects kind of on the other end of the continuum, so where you start to really incorporate more math and statistical type models to predict that, predict behavior. And with these really on this continuum, I think that there aren't kind of discrete buckets here, but just kind of varying grades of gray that kind of flows throughout these. There's also a user-based consideration here, which is that typically those descriptive have a much kind of broader user base, and then as you move towards predictive, you may get much more niche, so in terms of having a couple data scientists or real advanced analysts. But there are shades of gray in between that as well. And the point of the session today will really be to look at this continuum and to consider kind of what organizations need to do to be able to kind of successfully deliver on this continuum. Because what we've really seen is that an organization that will excel at making data-driven decisions really needs to be able to provide a platform to be able to achieve each of these needs to each of these user types, as well as some of those kind of subtle, say, gray areas in between where there may be some overlap or ambiguity. And so in order to do that, I think we need to think of these as a bit of a spectrum. And so what we'll look at today are four kind of key areas: data, tools, people, and processes. And really it's harmony across these things that will empower organizations to make decisions in a very kind of rich experience. A failing in any of these areas really will create significant challenges to be able to make those decisions kind of confidently and with ease. And so I'd say what we often see is that organizations will really first kind of consider the data and the tools. And in some ways, I sort of understand that those are the tangible things. They're sort of easy to show progress on. They're often kind of sold by, you know, some snazzy vendors. But provisioning data and rolling out the new tools really kind of mean nothing without the processes and people that make them work. And so we will start today with the data, and then we'll move on to the tools, because they do kind of naturally build upon each other, and there are certainly some kind of very kind of interesting considerations there. But you have to promise me not to kind of tune out before the people and processes, because those aspects are really the last mile of it, and they often tend to be the difference maker. They can be overlooked at times or falsely assumed to be simple, and oftentimes we see them kind of considered as an afterthought, but we think they are like very important in fleshing out the full picture of this. But we'll start thinking a little bit about the data, and so this may be organizations asking themselves questions like, what kind of data do I need, or what's the quality of the data that exists, what's the shape of the data, how should it be stored. And if we go back to our continuum for a minute and we think about some of the data challenges that you might have, so what types of different data do you need to be able to achieve each of these different scenarios? And I think some of it may be the same type of information. Some of it may be very different information. It's very common that it's kind of similar enough that you feel like it should all be the same, but also different enough that it doesn't quite work. So it might need to be modeled very differently for predictive analytics than it would be for your operational reporting. And so we like to think about, what is needed for each of these different areas to be able to provide the data flexibility that's required within an organization. So let's think a bit about kind of the data storage you might need. For the descriptive, if we start there, what a lot of customers use here is some sort of enterprise data store, so something that is very strong, robust, stable, things that may be very kind of process-oriented and has assured quality to it. And those of you who have kind of data warehouses in place will probably recognize the benefit of that in many scenarios, but will probably also be kind of very familiar with some of the challenges that come along with that. So things like how long it might take to get data into that kind of highly process-driven environment, how costly it might be to take data through different environments to get it to that kind of cleansed and perfect star schema at the end potentially. And I would say some may have you believe that kind of in the new age world, the need for this is less and less. And I would say in some aspects that may be true. But I do think the reality is in the probably short and medium term, there is still a strong need in many organizations for this type of like highly modeled, stable data. If you think about, finance, for example, where you may have to be able to stand up to audits or do some of your, financial reporting out of it. Those types of things will always kind of require that robust environment. And I would say this enterprise data store, we're talking kind of abstractly about technology. It could be a data warehouse. It could be a number of different things. It could be in SQL Server. It could be in SAP BW. We've also found that more and more people are moving these things to the cloud, so having that enterprise data store in places like Amazon Redshift or Azure DW. So there are still some considerations around how you do this element of it and how it fits in with your kind of big picture scheme. Moving on from there, really to do that ad hoc BI and analytics, you need more of an agile data store as well. So something that is maybe more flexible than your enterprise data store. Perhaps you're purchasing a new data stream and you want to be able to incorporate it very quickly to recognize immediate business value from it, and taking it through your enterprise data warehouse just isn't going to be possible on those sorts of timelines. So a way to be able to bring in data that is much more flexible. There will still need to be some process associated with it, but you may be able to get away with slightly less assured quality here. It might not have to withstand the same rigor as some of your financial information, but you could trade off a bit of that to get the flexibility that you need. And again, from a technology perspective, we've seen that this could be in the same technology as your enterprise data store, but it could be something entirely different as well. So we've seen customers with, SAP BW, for example, as our enterprise data store, and use a technology like Click to do this agile data bit that gives them a little bit more flexibility, another path that data can kind of take within their organization to get to some of those insights faster. And then what about ad hoc? So this might be, almost throwaway scenarios where you want to test and discard something. You may need to prepare a data set in a very specific way to run a statistical model on it, but after that, there may be no real need to keep the data structured in that way. It may be more of a sandbox environment for advanced analysts. It could be a data lake, it could be a structured database. Really, it's anything that would kind of meet the needs that are required to be able to quickly bring data in, ingest it, provide some form of analysis on it, and be able to determine whether it gets kept or discarded. So what's interesting with some of these things is that these aren't, even these are not kind of discrete storages. What you really need are to kind of consider the concepts of what's needed within the organization, but also what the interplay between them might be. So you may find that something gets brought into an ad hoc data store, is evaluated to see if it provides business value. If you decide that it does, you may then start to put some processes around it, incorporate it into a more agile data store. And it may live there forever, or it may live there for a year or so before you decide that it is worthy of being incorporated into an enterprise data store, that it is worth going through the process of getting it into that kind of more robust database. So things can move kind of throughout these somewhat fluidly, and having a structure that allows that and supports that is pretty important. The other bit of this is, how do you bring these things together? So we're going to move on to tools next, and as we start to think about tools, you'll recognize that the users won't necessarily care where the data resides. Your agile data store will likely need to have a lot of the information that already exists in your enterprise data store and combine it with new data. So how do you put something on top of these that works? And that could be things like semantic layers. They could be there physically. It could be done through something like data virtualization. So there are a number of different ways that these things can be achieved technically. But the importance, I think, is really thinking about what are the different business scenarios that drive these different sorts of needs. So if you're starting to think about kind of your architectural landscape, I would say think about those questions. Think about what different paths people will need within the organization to ingest data and to be able to understand it. And then start to build out the architecture around that. And that will likely be a combination of different types of databases. It may be a combination of cloud and on-premise. It might be data lakes. It might be very structured databases. So there are quite a few considerations here. But if you start with what's needed from a business perspective and the paths that are needed, you could quickly start to evolve that to the technologies that get mapped to those. And so with that, I thought we'll move on a bit to thinking now about the tools. And this is really how the users will interact with the data once it's kind of been provisioned for them. If we think kind of historically and we look at our spectrum again, the tools did really used to be bucketed in kind of these discrete bins quite a bit. So your descriptive tools were done through things like SQL Server reporting services or maybe Crystal reports, things that were very highly formatted, pixel perfect. Anything that was more kind of exploratory or diagnostic, maybe you were using Excel on top of analysis services or a TM1 or a Hyperion cube. And then if you were doing predictive and prescriptive, it was much more of your kind of SAS, SPS technologies. However, in modern times, what we've really seen is that these different bins have really converged quite a bit. And a number of tech tools now are playing a little bit in all of these spaces. So if we think about some of the technologies that a number of our customers are using now, say Power BI, for example, which acts very much as a kind of diagnostic tool where you can drag and drop and interact with the data, but it also allows users to write R code right within visuals in Power BI. So it starts to blend some of the prescriptive, predictive, and diagnostic into one tool. And if we think about a tool like Qlik, for example, which has always been kind of well known for its highly interactive front-end interface, good for diagnostics, they've acquired companies like Nprinting, which gives the ability to also have more structured reporting. And so the convergence of these tools has really offered some pretty interesting opportunities, I would say, for organizations. One is that solutions that previously were kind of siloed can now bring in a bit of the more advanced concepts into potentially less advanced solutions. So we can start to have Power BI dashboards that also incorporate R logic into it. You could have, your niche user base write algorithms that are then being kind of shared in dashboards that are used by a wider or a broader audience. And in that sense, you start to be able to recognize some of the value that you get from those predictive or prescriptive elements really by more and more users. And in doing that, another interesting phenomenon starts to happen, which is that your user base starts to move up the curve as well. So users who were previously just interacting with diagnostic type tools now start to be a bit more exposed to analytics. You may still want to be careful about who's writing some of these algorithms and how they're used within the organization, but you start to expose the users to something and get them a bit more comfortable with some of these advanced concepts, which will make the challenge of kind of moving users up that curve a little bit easier as you go to start doing it. And so it's a pretty cool phenomenon to see here with the convergence of tools and the impacts that it really has across your user base. And that's going to lead us to the next bit, which is my personal favorite, which is the people aspect of it. And how do you make sure that the people are really amplifying any investment that you make in that technology? So as I had kind of mentioned on our early slides, many organizations will start with an investment in technology, and that's typically driven around data and tools. And then some number of users will be kind of trained on the solutions, and some level of skill will be associated with that, usually kind of generally low. The output of that is some valuable insights, so some opportunities to provide real business value to increase revenues or to reduce costs. But in many ways, the insights that you see on the other end of it, the value that you get out of that investment in technology is a product of the number of users and the skill level of those users. So as you start to increase those two factors, in many ways you're amplifying the potential opportunity that businesses could recognize by making those data-driven decisions. And that's an easy kind of concept to grasp, I think, but how do you put it into practice and how do you actually do that, I think, is something that, in conversations with customers is always sort of the hard part, managing that sort of change. And so what I put here is just this is an example of a user empowerment program that we shaped with one of our customers. This one was on kind of Tableau specifically, but you can kind of take away the technology aspect of it for a minute and just think about some of the key concepts that are required here for really getting users kind of up the curve and in a position that they can contribute to a data-driven organization. First is really foundational learning. So how do you give them the base that they need? Teach them the technology, teach them how to use the data. And that's really important, really. It's not just a generic tool training, but how do you train your users on actual solutions, on actual data that they'll be using in actual environments. And so we think that foundational learning, the more bespoke you can make it to what the user's experience will really be like, the better chance it has of being successful. And then once you kind of take the training wheels off a little bit, how do they get along with applying that learning? So the first thing users will do after coming out of a training is probably try to start tinkering around with it a bit themselves. And if they find that they hit a roadblock and they can't kind of get beyond that, that's when a number of people will sort of give up. That's why we've kind of incorporated this coaching element into it, which is how do you ensure that there is some sort of live one-on-one support as users are really starting in their first couple months of using this technology and of becoming more data-driven. How do you really support them in that? And then how do you make sure that the learning doesn't stop there? So as they get comfortable, how do you provide different kind of programs within the organization or a path for people to really be able to do more and more and to continue their learning? And we think all of this is kind of important to be done within a community as well. So how do you build some sort of internal community that helps facilitate this learning and helps kind of build off of each other? And we've seen this work really well with a number of our customers. One customer has a user group that's, hundreds strong that is really kind of supporting and almost very self-sufficient in taking care of each other to advance their kind of capability in these areas. And the last that we'll look at is process. And this one is a bit of a tricky one, to be honest, because the process really permeates through all of these different areas. Some of them can be attributed to specific areas. So, for example, with your people, you'll have to think about processes like how do people enroll, who needs to enroll, how do you certify how well people kind of have understood the technology. So some of them can be attributed to the individual aspects of it, but many of them kind of span these. So if you think about access, for example, it spans people, data, and tools. And I think there are a number of different things that kind of can be considered alongside of these. I think the most important takeaway is really that any initiative that you're doing on people, data, and tools should really consider processes throughout. So it shouldn't be done as an afterthought, but something that's done kind of proactively to make sure that things aren't so process-oriented that they get bogged down, but that there's enough of a path forward there so that it's clear to see what the series of steps need to be taken to be able to kind of achieve a particular end. And so that was quite a bit in a short period of time. I've got just a couple of slides on how you might consider getting started with it. And I think my biggest piece of advice is really to start with the business goals. We talked about that a little bit on the data slide, but to think about what is it that the business needs to achieve? What are the paths the data needs to take? What are the types of reporting that needs to be done? And I think that if you root everything in that, that will be a very good kind of basis for ensuring that whatever you're doing will, in the end, provide value back to the business. The second thing I would say is think about how well you currently meet those goals at your current state, and think about it across those 4 areas we just talked about. So you may do some sort of kind of grading or heat map to say, here are the places where we're doing really well, we've got plenty, and here are the ones where we think, we need to give some focus to. Once you get to that point, you can really begin to map the technical possibilities to the business goals within those areas. And I would say focus on the problem areas, but make sure that you're considering all 4 aspects in any kind of initiatives you're taking on. So if you're doing a tool selection, don't do it without considering the data, people, and process in some elements as well. Don't start with the data and not think about how it will impact the people or the processes. So the more integrated that you can consider those things, the more successful I think it will be. And so I've given you some ideas about how you might get started. If you're thinking you need some more help or information on that topic or on any of the other ones that I've kind of got listed here, feel free to reach out to me. I will share my contact info again at the end of this webcast. There are a number of different places that we'd be happy to help you guys if there are conversations that you want to have or just further discussions on how you might get started and moving towards that data-driven organization or evaluating any kind of particular aspect of those areas we spoke about today. And that's all that I have today. So again, my contact information is there. Feel free to give me a call or to drop me an email if you have any questions about the session today or if there's anything else you would like more information on. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.